starting to recognize what's really going on. Knowing thyself is knowing that everything of thy system is operating in that position of the system, is unconditional of everything in travel. So the more we identify ourselves, the more we get in a position of balance in our systems. Now, come in that directions. You guys have calculation ground centers. Test coming up in line, set position 3 box frames, strangulation over flux. In position to the immune lines, proximation lines and dietary lines, in position location of cycle, and to its nervous system. Now, it's how you correlate communication lines, convergence of timeline frame, process lines of indicates the setting, going beyond measure and scale, balance of communication lines of structure, how you see anything through wires of indication. This travels in 3 centers of set position operation lines of setting calculation to a setting. Okay, travels point lines of 3, shift lines anomaly, right? 3 right there, right? Shift line, right? Position of point 3 graphs and direct lines of grounds. Okay, process indication lines and position locations, operation lines of sequence, and channel operation. Convergence lines of docking stations, 3 centers of measure, position lines at finger point lines of travel. Okay, so I'm just trying to get you guys to indicate what's really going on in the set position of this operation cycle. How you communicate line position of 5 lines of scale, 4 centers of scale, 9 rotations. Thumb indicate lines of 3 fingers, process lines of the 4th finger, sets lines of travel, direct lines of link, and that calculation screen locations. Okay, 5 in setting of operation. All right, so this converts all positional location settings to immune to autoimmune, like core centers, dietary location, all positional on 1 cycle, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 locations. A tracks, A position lines of B, B senior over D, flux over 2, 1 over sequence. Okay, so you got 2 panels of information lines into high core centers of calculation. All right, directing finger point lines of grounds, over lines of cross, inside line, outside travel, directing inside line, condition and convergence system, wires of indication lines of travel, indirect lines of link, a process calculation. Says position, operation lines of sequence, and travel calculation of screen lines, adaptation of flux. 4 centers of travel, 80 positions. Now, the count high centers, directing lines, and location system is off center. That is inside travels in 4 center indication lines of wire signatures. It's a very complicated system, how you come in a healing line of aspect, location of wires, signatures, location of grounds. It says communication high centers, attached to the system box frames, trading line has some high positions. There's your hand information. Okay? Now, how this works is to understand how to use the atom lines. Atoms are line core centers, line communicates to its convergence system and lines an electron. Positron, neuron, set core is a neutron. Line core centers are making high position convergence lines of high setting. It says position of processing, directing ground center lines of sequence. Outline layer, inside lines of travel. Correlate communication inside and diffusion, directing inside lines of calculations. All through operation. The hand formation. All right? Okay, so once you have the complete cycle, outside line, inside lines of travel, get a communication lines of high lines of mark, marking screen, adaptation, and process line, directing lines of link, sets overline signals in 3 centers of measure and 4 centers of scale. Okay? They convert their system through lines of setting, ventricle system, all modification lines of wires of indications. 3 centers of scale, 4 centers of position, correlate communication lines, digital imprints, lines of travel. Inside line, condition setting, position with consent travel. Okay? So, 3 lines of indicated lines of wires, 3 impulses, directing ground set line sequence. Circulation over 1, circulation over 2, process lines of 3, process lines of 4, 5, 6, and 8 lines of channel operation. All through finger point lines of grounds. Okay? Waving screens, adaptation of travel. Now directing line position of its immune system, travels in point lines of graph. So it's all over your imagination how you see it in travel. You have a convergence system all through setting, operation lines of sequence. Plotted to locations, comes in all channels of operation. Directing ground centers, wires signature lines, process line position all levels. Wire signature lines of red, indicates lines of setting, and security line communication system, process location setting. Wires of indication, right? So red is indication of what? Security, right? Red, right? Goes dark, red, right? Sets all lines in high position. Blue, okay, is coolant. All right, so I'm just trying to get in the basic understanding how to go through the process of the immune, dietary, and location nervous system. Wires of indication outline setting. Process lines of 3 inline operation lines of sequence. Location of the system. Roots over square root over triangulation. Now, inside line, outside line, lines of serve, location setting convergence. Plasma line, plasma core centers, location and convergence lines of travel. Timeline centers, time sequences, times pi. Finger point lines of joints, directing lines of digital lines of framing, outside line measure, sets communication position, convergence set lines of travel. Okay? Okay, so that position location setting. So your indicate lines is process indication digital imprints that puts lines into compliance, directing ground centers, lines of hand, line rotation, lines of grounds. So it syncs lines of panel, process lines of indication system, and calculation travel, sets lines of inline centers, at lines of signals. Okay, there's course centers and communication setting to stress. All right, so set communication lines. What are you going to use on lines of coolant? Directing lines of measure and scale, communication lines of position. This is where you come into the hydroponics, directing lines of coolants, process lines of soil, direct lines of plasma, directing lines of light, condition setting and position, operation lines of sequence. So change position, operation lines, process calculation lines of orange. Okay, is your position lines into creator line, infinity line, line center location setting calculations. Okay, so that's red and orange. So that's position location line, condition setting. Indicate lines, 3 lines of signals. Okay, so that's red, orange, and blue. Okay, blue comes in. Course centers, indirect lines and calculation screen locations. Inside travel. And set positions, operation set lines of sequence. Okay, no more scale, no more communication lines, position of stress. Gone through equation. Signals back and down lines, set lines of wires of indication setting. It goes in one line signature and one position of all levels of blue and travel. Okay, so that's just red. Okay, now your motion line track is an infinity line rotation lines of cycles and time frame. In that position lines a high center location of the system, all through traction. That indicates lines of position of the thumb, indicates around the cycles, line centers of travel communicates to its position through balance. Okay, so that's indicate line centers. Now we're just going through the hand formation system. Same process, indicate lines of position locates to its setting, how you see it in modification lines in your temperature reading, barometers, thermometers, indicates lines of position of flux, process line positions. Okay, so you go through your 12 lines of chakras, that's calculated and modified. Now you go through line course centers, we come into Reiki. The Reiki formation setting is just a readjusting your existing. Okay, that processes your kilo mics, your kaleidoscopes, chord lines, your paragraph, screen lines, adaptation of flux. Communicates lines of high center. Let's bring in the purple. Purple line signals, outline signals into infiniting lines, roots of the routers, course centers of travel. 4 indicates high centers lines, communication position line travel. Right? Overriding sequence, overlines into compilation settings, travels at point lines of time lines of measure and scale. Says coordinates, 4 lines of blue, 4 lines of purple, directing lines of 4 point lines of graph and finger point lines of joints. Set course centers and position lines of 5 lines set location with thumbs of indication, all through calculation. So as you change the color, you change in frequency tone, and you're changing lights and metaphors. You change the light signals, you change in all position lines of setting. The correlation line connection setting, start with the alphabetical line screen adaptation of flux, cross lines of indication, all through travel. Now it's going to get more complicated, right? So I'm just showing you exactly how you go through the hand so you can understand how to go through the immune system, knowing exactly how you go through wires of indication lines of travel. So it's processing, bringing it in, seeing the line position location, has an inner pulse that's processed to its electrical impulse that puts all positions direct in line connection, direct line on pulse, high course centers convergence in position to its pulse line center location to its pulsionary. Course centers in the compulsory, direct line course centers convergence and location line state locations at inner travel. So it's like, right? It's locked in signal, right? It's going really fast. It's coming to combustion lines, air winds, process line position of bubble lines. Get these lines to your back, lines to state location system. Release, right? Then it goes back in order, back in straight release, back in flux, right? So it's conversion of frequency of grounds, guys. How to process that is how to indicate that through your hands of signature lines, of coloration lines, of pattern. Okay, so understanding what does it mean to you? What is purple? What is yellow? What is green? What is blue? Because there's no indication to anybody else. Now, when you're going through that, you're going through translucent, transparent, thermal, X-ray, or line communication gamma, or radiation. That's how you're healing their operation lines and signals all through your hand. So you communicate lines of image, process lines of vision, cortex lines of position of theta, operation lines of signals. Now, as you go higher lines of frequencies, you got to balance out the rotation lines of spin cycles because they have cells and generation and process lines and engagement line centers. So let's bring in black. Correlation set lines of travel. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in the line position of the cells. They're going to be black so you can see them in signal. Okay, which is just void itself and set lines of travel. Okay. Okay, indicate lines into orange. Now we're just processing the indication lines of flux over lines, indirect lines of link, into settings, all through traction. Okay. Now they go through the circulation lines of the wires at your setup, position, location, and processing, directing lines of grounds, and position, location, digital lines, and high position, location, and travel. Indicates position of flux over lines and constant lines of grounds and communication. This is all through the hand. All right, so colors, lines of grounds. Let's bring in the green. Okay, green is line settings. Metric course centers matrix. Mind alteration lines of state. If the mind lines communicates to its convergence of its thumbs. Fingers are point lines of graph. Inner joints, outline signals, outline correlations of travel. Inside line condition setting, process of indication lines of flux. Okay? So it's very powerful how you come into that position to all levels, into your electrical system, your nervous system, and your dietary system. It's true they understand everything inside, how it works in setting. Everything inside, right? Now, they look together, right? But they're not. Okay? They're not together. Okay? They're inseparable in the mind. They use their telepathy in set positions, right? But they are not attached to each other. Okay? They only connect through their mind, through telepathy, through each other. It just looks like they're connected to each other, right? They're separated. So I want to make it very well clear when you get in the position, how your information system, all through healing of aspects of you and travel, how you modify that all just through your hand, okay? Experiment one position, one point graph, one communication, one setting, line connection setting to convert the system all through setting that process line position lines of travel that come into your ecosystem through placements, your compartments, and your components is knowing how to go through the wires of indication setting all through travel, okay? So this is all calculated and modified through atoms. You change the colors, lines of space, lines of time frame. Okay, that's just atoms, not protons, electrons, not neutrons, just atoms itself. Specifically in that position, how it works in the wires of indication lines of healing. Wire signatures, now easy lines of formats, you set 8 tracks. 8 tracks are the position lines of balance and sequence in the atmosphere lines, altitude, screen, location, setting, and travel. Okay, so in A line settings, process lines over B, B over lines of C, C over lines of D, process lines of E, set course settings, and question over mark and screen. Okay? So it's amazing how you basically put this all back together and set positions and settings, hands back information setting, in heal and rotation. Okay? All through conversion. Okay? Now, understanding the hand is understanding the structure, is understanding the schematics, and understand the position of the basic lines, how you use an atom. So we're going to go into basics. A equals B. Okay? So what is A? A is the atom. 2 rotation lines of spins and travels in point lines of graph, right? Now, that A indicates lines of position lines of travel, 3 centers of travel, communication of convergence. Directing ground centers, vertical line centers, structure line division, on line center, on sequence, on pi. What you have to understand, line position location, is the balance of everything. It rotates the spins at 3 central locations lines of 3 molecules of design. Process lines of vacation lines of balance over 3 centers, 4 centers of travel, and set lines of travel. Sets course centers, and direct lines of link, and process communications, all right? So we use the set position lines of setting, converts the system lines of travel, directing here, here, and here. 4 centers, okay, into the pinky, and to the fingers. Okay, so we modify the line strings into symmetry, location to its calculation setting, constellation, all through travel. Okay, so that converts the system into here in travel communications. Okay, all right, so how do we have that? Position lines of high centers, operation lines set position, operation lines of 4 centers, location with signals, process indication setting, all through indication lines. Now I'm using protons because I changed information lines of panel. Okay, thumb of indication and set lines of travel. Okay, process line, direct lines of ground line, communication setting, box frame, triangulation, high core centers, codification setting, travel inside position, wires of signatures, 4 centers of measure, and 4 centers of scale communications. Directing ground centers, set lines of travel, direct lines of grounds. 2 panels of operation line screens, process lines of indication lines, into thumbs of indications, cross line angles, 1, 2, 3, and set position of 4, and set line scale. There's the hand. Okay? So, you truly have to understand how to structure the division through schematics of pi, and understand how to use it through a primary circuit in a highway of travel. Because everybody's body has a temperature and a thermometer and a barometer reading. The process of the correlation setting, the convergence system is a surfacing highway that you have to modify through, is you have to be very careful what you're touching through wire signatures. All you got to find is the signature line that's offline. It's like a light bulb that goes off. All light bulbs go off all at once, right? So that's what you're fixing. So it could be an AB's over traction, Okay, AB equals lines of C over lines of traction. Set lines in fusion, seized. So 6 over 1 over measures at lines offline. 3 signatures off ground, set position, operates lines, and position location to a system, right? Convert the system back in traction, back in balance, back in operates line core centers, committed position line settings. Bring the signature lines of coloration, blue in center. Set core centers, 4 lines of signal location setting. Flush line, core centers of calculations. Red line signals, security line position panel, security line position all levels of fields at operation lines of setting. Sets communicates in high position, back in traction. Done by equation. All right. So I'm just showing you what goes on through the hand. How you go through structure, it's schematics. When you're looking at somebody's body, you're seeing through a mapping system, all through travel, all through directions, all through locations. Okay? It's very complicated stuff. So this is what you do with your immune. This is what you do with your autoimmune. This is what you do with your nervous system. This is what you do with your dietary system. I'm just giving you structures through the hand because it's much easier. Anything through the stomach line is very complex because now you're coming into the microbiome. Because it has so many lines, position lines of wire signatures that grounds locations. It's one signal that processes everything of signal. So you have one signature that goes all line position to one high weight interaction. All line position operation. Okay, so your body is infinity 8 rotation lines of cycle. Okay, so let's get position lines of travel. Okay, process here, there's your finger. 3, position of 4, and position of 5. Okay? All right, set sentence sequence. Energetic highways are going through flux. Set core centers, travels, mapping set lines of pi. Indicates rounds, online signals, back in traction, back in location setting, and position of its operation. Okay? Very powerful stuff in sequence. So again, you get wires, signatures, start with the A tracks. Now that converts the system into position trans line centers, trans communications, transference, and location transcendence. Directing the inset lines, process line position. Starting line position of A, go with B, go with C, go with D, and go with E. Okay, this is your position all levels. This is your finger. Okay, A, B, C, D, E. All right, indicates E lines, D lines of flux, C lines of travel, B lines of atom, core centers of A over sequence. Okay, so that process lines are direct lines of grounds and position location and processing. Direct lines of ground communication position to convert the system all through calculations. So as we process that, we start with the connections on line centers. Now, sequence lines of panel, process of that communication lines, energy line core centers converted to position locations. Correlation lines of solar panels. The process of that indication has flux line core centers to communicate to its position to its operation lines of signals. Now, in that connecting high center locations, you look at your hand, set lines of setting, just try to go through the design line, how it's set lines of position. Its operation set lines of travel. Okay, go through waving line centers, process indicates and setting. All you got to understand the structure and the schematics through its position of its barcode. Okay, setting lines of 1, process lines of 2, 3, set position of 4, and line centers and position lines of 5 over traction. There's the hand. All right, all through waving lines. Now there's electrical line lines. Now we have the outline connection system, which is the outcast. That's the finger itself that modifies the set location to a system all through travel. Outside in, outside in, outside in, inside out. Okay? So these are just wires of signature, right? But you understand the inner lines and the outer line signal. Wires of indication is really, really powerful stuff, how you indicate that position lines of healing. Healing is just basically the home, the existing, the awakenings to the levels, just the heal in the line centers, and you come to home line centers, into the existing, into the awareness, the atmospheres, into the levels of indication. All right? So how you see fit is knowing exactly yourself through your own intel, how it processes its own body, of its own signature, of its own line center locations, how it see it through all levels of transparent, translucent, thermal, or X-ray. But the body itself is just nothing but a mechanism that you have to understand through override settings in sequence line communication of supercharging highway. And for you to modify these things, you have to understand what's going on through its energetic flow pattern and that position of its operation, right? So let's go into line settings of cells. Okay, cells are block shares, time centers, location, bridging line, square roots, and travel. Okay, I bring that in. All line connection setting is 7. All right, 7 lines, C lines, rotation lines of surface. So in the convergence system, all through travel, let's go into blue line centers, indicate lines, 3 centers of travel, wires of indicates lines of flux. Mapping everything, line and ground lines of sequence. Anything out of order at a map line, change course centers, dividing lines of settings of travel. Now that converts the system to calculations. Bring in the red, which is this carry line, outside signal. Okay, inside position. Stress line, anxiety line, stress interference, location of fear. Okay, and it's all indicated lines of wires. So when you look at it in that position location, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's your 5 fingers at grounds. So process your indicates and setting, how you come in your coolants, your directions, your online setting and sequence, process line positions. 7's out of whack, 5's out of sequence, 7's out of travel, 7 is not in process of communication. Right? So that's what you got to fix. All right. So it's really interesting when you come into the wires line. So let's say this is the immune system, right? That's what it is that you're seeing through wire signatures, right? So making sure they're in position, make sure they're in balance, offset position, red comes in, right? Overrides the purple, okay? Which is the resistor, okay? Whoa, it's combusting, right? Setting up sonar waves, echo waves, high screen adaptation on process lines in that communication. All right, convert the system line position, change over lines of traction centers. Okay, bring in all lulls back in purple, override signals, set the circuits, location and coolants, and operation lines of position to its formation setting. Back in setting. Operation line signals, purple round line centers, lines of indication lines of 4 lines of wires, 5 lines of signals, back in 7 rotation lines of grounds. Back in setting, back in operation location setting. Right, so your position of your immune system is back in traction. It's very confusing, isn't it? How we set this up through healing, rotation lines of spins. Now this is all through setting operation. So once you identify how to understand this, the colors and lights, then you can understand it through structure and set position and division. The wires of indications, because you're working with the wires, you're working with the electrical system, how it modifies everything in temperature readings, barometers and thermometers. It's like your earth is 98,000 lines, say, and a process location 98% line position in your body frame. When you have a thermometer and anything above 98, you start flushing, you start getting irritable, and you start getting dizzy and nausea. So this helps you to identify how to use your wires as signature lines of travel, how to process that position, how to understand how the atoms change, how the protons change. Anything changes the formation setting, it's not coming from them, it's coming from you. And that's what you have to modify the body that you're in and modify the body that you're out. The outline body is the outer line settings. The in-by body location is you in traction. So that defines positional levels. That puts position location polarities, how you see travel. If you have atom line rotations in a proton, 2 centers of sequence, 3 centers of scale. Start with the A, start with the B, start with the C, start with the D. Everything's chronological order, right? All right, so use affirmation lines, ground line, course centers, direct line positions. This is your position lines, the ground lines, course centers, and your directions. Okay, this is modify your location system to your arm. That's your arm. Okay, that's your arm right there. Boom, right? All right, so it indicates lines of grounds, securing lines, 3 centers of measure, over lines of B over tractions, directing inside energetic flow, ground centers of sequence, panels, operation lines, line operation lines, ascending a travel. Okay, so in that position, there's high centers. You have to have blue line because blue is a coolant that overrides the set lines of wires of indications. Outline course of B over C, C over D, E over F. So it's convergence system off the setting. Energetic flow patterns coming in. All right, let's say anything off center locations. What's not supposed to be there is over lines of pink. Pink is over lines of A. That outlines the single lines of B over C. Right, so that's outline, right? So that converts back inside, convert the system back in structure, back division, back to locations. So we convert this system to image, process lines of indicates lines of flux, indicates lines of grounds, sets lines of arrows of indications, 3 centers of scale. Convert this system back in setting, okay? So it's kind of like putting it back inside through the mind imagination. Wires go back in signal, back in center, back in operation. Convert the system back to the elbow, back to the arm line, set lines of sequence, and panels, uppers, lines, centers, and communication system. Setting convergence, directing ground centers of set travel. Coloration lines, light metaphors, back in balance. Operation lines, set location lines, wires of indications in a continuous flow, and set rotation. Okay? So all this disappears back to normal and set lines of sequence. Okay? And that just dissolves. So when it dissolves, the core centers of transistors, resistors comes in, overrides the signal with light signals, position the receivers. Receivers, core centers, and resistors over the transition location of transmission. Dividing ground centers on sequence line communications. All right, travels point lines graph, coloration lines, blue. Blue overrides the signals. White grass screens, directing inside lines, fix the wires that indicate lines of flux over travel. Okay, bring that in and set position to its operation. Okay, now it's all position lines of setting, white grass screens, clean slate, indicate lines, back and travel, back and calculation screen location of its systems all through setting. Okay, bring it out, set lines of travel. It's all back to frequency and balance of communication, right? So the wires go back in the connections to its setting, its traffic runway. So set lines of green, set lines of signals, ground lines of sequence, plotted line rotates lines of surface of travel. Green indicates line position of flux. The process line connects the setting to the failsafe that indicates position of process calculation. Indicate line ground centers and sequence lines of panel. Circulation lines, combustion over screen location, right? Work with inside the line centers and sequence lines of panel and correlation lines of traction. Inside calculation lines, set position location and settings, all through operation. Done by equation, right? So it's amazing how it formulates and simulates in travel. Back in sequence, back in balance. Throw it through the arm. So that's how you start with the alphabetical system, right? Charts the locations of the flow chart. It's no difference how you see things through X-ray, right? Or anything translucent, transparent, thermal, or anything lines and settings, gamma, signature lines, radiation lines, grounds, height, position line, travel. But I'm just trying to get you guys how you modify your hands and how to see through the arms of indication. Okay? That's the process of healing. Now this is just basics of A, B, and C. Okay? Okay, so what we have to identify is the signature lines, you know exactly where it's coming from. Where's the stress level coming from? Where's the temperature reading? Where's the barometer? Where's the thermometer? What's happening? What's going on? You know, why am I feeling like this? Why am I feeling like that? First, indicate anything that happens to you, you alarm yourself right away. You know exactly it's here. You know exactly it's here because you feel it. And that's what you get in directions of. You go on a thermal line that brings it in position of cross-referencing. That puts all communicates the setting to its convergent system to its setting. Okay, to open lines of panel, process lines, position, location, line, connection, extensions, operation lines, and sequence. That sets position right away, so that detects everything location to its setting all through travel. So it's very, very confusing if you don't understand the body of you. For you to understand the wires of signatures, is understand just the basic levels of A, B, and C. Through its operation signals, into light metaphors, in travels and correlation setting, and positional processing through your aura of indications. Knowing how to use that modification lines of signals in location to its grounds, and set lines of sequence in position to its operations and travel, all through indication. Okay? So we're good on that level, in that position, but this is just basically understanding how to get into the process through your immune, your dietary, and locations to your nervous system. Okay? Wires of indications. That's all it is. Nothing else, nothing more. But as you go deeper and deeper and deeper, it depends where the stress level is at. Is it above the temperature reading or is it below the temperature reading? And that comes in position of glucose, and that comes in all formation setting into your sugar count, or that comes in position location dietary setting, your bacteria location setting to travels, your modification lines of ground, your set lines of sequence, your patterns line, core standard convergent system, your activity line position locations, your behavior line centers, your motion line tractions. Just goes on and on and on and on, guys. For you to understand this through indication system, it's truly master yourself inside lines of travel. Okay? This helps you identify your system, how to get in position lines of balancing yourself, knowing exactly how to come into that through processing. Through the home beacon, to the existing, to all levels of the access that process your set core centers, how you communicate the non-centers, location, and settings, all through travels of levels, a process of position lines of operation. Okay? Set calculation ground centers, constellation on ground centers, lines of sequence. Go on the communication lines convergent system into level C, level D, level C, level D. See it?